we start with the breaking news at this hour as Israel has carried out strikes on Iran's nuclear program. The IDF has said with blasts heard in Tehran. The strikes were part of Operation Rising Lion, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, adding Iran was a threat to Israel's very survival. Israel has declared a state of emergency, saying the country expected retaliation. Well, joining me live are our Middle East correspondent, Hugo Bashega in Jerusalem, our senior reporter, Bern de Boosman at the White House, and our State Department correspondent, Tom Bateman. Hugo, I'll come to you first. Tell us more about what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying about these strikes.
Yes, Steve. So it is just after 5 o'clock in the morning here. So this campaign by the Israeli military was announced 2 hours ago by the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz. This has been described as a preemptive, precise, combined offensive based on high-quality intelligence. Dozens of targets have been hit across Iran, striking long-range missiles and targets related to the country's nuclear program. So for a very long time, Israel and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has described Iran's nuclear program as an existential threat, and we're seeing now a large-scale attack by the Israeli military. Now, there has been a statement by the Israeli military's chief of staff saying that the time had come. We have reached the point of no return. So it is very interesting that the way events unfolded this week. There was a phone call between the Prime Minister and President Trump on Monday. There was a leak of this phone conversation, perhaps not by accident, saying that the President was against any kind of Israeli military action against Iran, while these negotiations for a deal between American and Iranian officials continued. There was a round of talks expected to take place on Sunday, and now these attacks happening. Now, we're seeing reports as well in Israeli media saying that apart from the airstrikes targeting those facilities connected to Iran's nuclear program, there have been assassinations, and the targets include the chief of the Iranian military, senior military officials, and senior nuclear scientists. So a large-scale attack that has been carried out by Israel. A state of emergency has been declared here in Israel. A phone alert was sent to everybody in this country about 2 hours ago. Schools are going to be closed today. Gatherings have been banned. The airport, Ben Gurion Airport, is also closed. So the country, is expecting a retaliation from Iran. The defense minister said people should expect a missile and drone attack in response to the attacks that we're seeing today.
Yeah, we'll ask you about those, the preparedness of Israel in just a moment. But just to come back onto the targets and the focus of Israel's attacks in Iran's nuclear program, was this something that was telegraphed or was known that this was perhaps coming?
Yeah, we saw that in the last few days there had been a number of reports suggesting that Israel was making preparations for a large-scale attack targeting facilities connected to Iran's nuclear program. And for quite some time, Israeli officials had been saying that they saw a window of opportunity to attack because last year, Iran's air defense capabilities were degraded after a number of Israeli airstrikes. Also, Iranian proxies in the region have been significantly weakened after action by Israel, in particular Hezbollah in Lebanon. There had been the concern in Israel that any kind of military action against Iran's nuclear program could spark a reaction from Hezbollah in Lebanon, the militia that is supported by Iran, heavily armed. We know that, Hezbollah has been significantly degraded after more than a year of conflict with Israel. So the Israeli authorities saw that an opportunity here, and what we're seeing today, is that Israeli officials are saying that there was the opportunity here to strike, that Iran was advancing with its nuclear program. Again, for a very long time, the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, had been saying that he saw the Iranian nuclear program as an existential threat. The Iranians had been saying also for a very long time that, their nuclear program is for peaceful purposes, but now we're seeing this large-scale Israeli attack targeting dozens of locations across Iran, military facilities, military assets connected to Iran's nuclear program.
Hugo, you mentioned that Israel's defense minister confirmed the strikes and declared that state of emergency, also saying that counterattacks were expected in the immediate future. What kind of preparedness is Israel doing to ensure that its people will be safe?
Yeah, it is very interesting also that the Israeli authorities are suggesting that this is just the beginning of what could be, a large-scale offensive over many days. The Israeli authorities were describing it as the first stage of this military offensive against Iran. Now, this is obviously a country with very strict security measures. Israel, there have been, security measures in place for quite some time, especially after October the 7th, the Hamas attacks in southern Israel. So this is a country where the population is, prepared for the possibility of attacks. A number of measures, have been announced, especially this morning. Again, there has been a ban on gatherings. Schools are going to be closed today. Hospitals have also announced a number of measures across the country. The airspace has been closed in Israel. The main international airport has also been closed. So a number of measures have been introduced now by the Israeli authorities as part of this state of emergency that has been declared after these attacks, Israeli attacks targeting a number of facilities across Iran.
Hugo, just to come back to that recent line of a news update that you gave us, Iranian state media, they've been reporting that the Iran Revolutionary Guard's chief, Hossein Salami, has been killed in an Israeli strike. He's among several senior leaders who have died. Tell us a bit more about the significance of Israel with regards to who they're targeting.
Yeah, so it is very interesting that what we're seeing that dozens of targets, military targets, have been hit across the country, but also a number of high-profile assassinations also already have been confirmed by in Iran by state media in the country. So it seems again that these are the indications of a really well-planned, large-scale attack, Israeli attack targeting Iran, nuclear scientists and top military commanders. And we saw again that the authorities in Israel said that those dozens of locations hit included facilities with long-range missiles and targets linked to the country's nuclear program. So again, for quite some time, Israel had been warning, the international community about the threats posed by Iran's nuclear program, Iran's nuclear ambitions. A military official in Israel, speaking right after the confirmation of these attacks, came from the defense minister, said that Iran had enough nuclear material to create 15 nuclear bombs within days, and that Iran was advancing secret attempts to assemble those weapons, and that could happen within in a very short period of time. So again, the Israeli authorities saying that Iran had been advancing this nuclear program, dismissing the Iranian position that its nuclear program was for peaceful purposes. And again, remember, there was a deal that had been struck with Iran by the international community during the Obama administration. President Trump, in his first term, pulled out from the deal. Ever since he came back to office earlier this year, he, led these efforts to try to negotiate a new deal with Iran. What we've seen in recent weeks was that, a number of American officials were saying that Iran wasn't making concessions in these negotiations, and that some of Iran's demands in those talks were considered to be unacceptable by the Americans, and that was the position in Israel as well. The authorities were saying that they would go ahead with a military attack, with some kind of military action against Iran if they considered the terms of any kind of deal to be unacceptable for Israel. So during, in the past few days, we saw a number of measures that were announced, in particular by the Trump administration, including the evacuation of the embassy in Iraq, because there is the fear that any kind of retaliation from Iran could also involve American assets becoming targets across the Middle East. So we saw that, in the last few days, there had been indications that an Israeli attack could be imminent, and this is exactly what happened today.
Yeah, we'll be getting reaction from Washington in just a moment. Thanks very much for that. Hugo Beshega there in Jerusalem. Just to add on to that, Iranian state media report saying that the Iran Revolutionary Guards chief Hossein Salami has been killed. They also added that Faredoon Abbasi, the former head of the Atomic Energy Organization, has also been killed. That's according to Iranian state media. Well, let's cross over now to Bernd Debusman, who's at the White House for more on the U.S. reaction to this. Bernd, it's late in the evening where you are. Has the White House said anything?
Well, there's been a brief statement from the State Department and from National Security Advisor Marco Rubio kind of distancing themselves from the attack. But other than that, there had been no real indication of this coming, at least from the White House perspective. At about 11 a.m. this morning, there was another event here at the White House in which Trump was explicitly asked if he thought an Israeli strike on Iran was imminent. He said he didn't think it was imminent, and he explicitly said that he did not want them to do this and potentially scupper any negotiations. Of course, there was indirect and direct negotiations expected to take place on Sunday. He was very explicit in that he did not want anything to get in the way of those negotiations, although he did say he thought things were fairly close to a strike, but certainly not in the time frame that we saw this evening.
And how are we expecting Donald Trump to react to this? As you mentioned, he's said he's didn't want to see Israel attack Iran, but we're not expecting to hear him speak this evening.
We won't be hearing from him on camera, at least this evening, although one suspects he might post on Truth Social at some point during the night. On one hand, he's been very steadfast in that he wants America to be a close ally of Israel, and he supports Israel's right to defend itself, as he says. On the other hand, there had been reports over the growing months, and it became increasingly clear that there was a rift between Trump and the Netanyahu government into how to approach the issue of Iran's nuclear program. There was reports a few months ago that he had waved off a previous plan for an Israeli strike in Iran, and he and the administration were very explicit in that they wanted to give negotiations more of a chance, which Netanyahu clearly didn't see as the case. But there'd been growing distance between the two sides, and it's just unclear at the moment how he will react if the administration feels it wasn't given notice too much ahead of time. Although we did see, of course, the warnings to U.S. families and U.S. military installations in the Middle East previously this week.
Bernd, we understand that the White House is saying that Trump is expected to attend a National Security Council meeting at 11 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow morning. What kind of posture do you think the U.S. is going to take on this, given that they don't want to say that they're involved, and presumably they have no interest in being drawn into another Middle East conflict?
Well, I think the messaging we'll hear from President Trump and other members of the cabinet tomorrow are again reiterating that there was no U.S. involvement in this airstrike, or in this series of airstrikes which were carried out by Israel unilaterally. And I think we'll hear very strong language from the U.S. warning Iran off of any strike on U.S. military facilities, for example, in Iraq or in the UAE, Kuwait, or Qatar, or Bahrain, where there's obviously earlier this week already been quite some concern about that those facilities could be caught in the crossfire of a conflict between Iran and Israel. I think we'll hear very strong language from the administration tomorrow warning Iran that it does not want to get involved in this conflict, but that if U.S. military facilities in the Middle East are targeted, the U.S. will respond.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Bern de Boosman at the White House. Let's cross over to our State Department correspondent, Tom Bateman, for more. Tom, there were some indications or clues, perhaps, that something was going to happen, given that the State Department had been recalling staff in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, it was Wednesday that there was a partial evacuation notice, a voluntary evacuation for some non-essential staff at the US Embassy in Baghdad, also at the mission in Erbil in northern Iraq, and then for non-essential staff and family members of military personnel in Bahrain and Kuwait, particularly significant military presence of the Fifth Fleet, the US Fifth Fleet based in Bahrain. Although I have to say it was unclear the degree to which whether this was kind of signalling to the Iranians in a way to try and put pressure on the nuclear talks, which, remember, was supposed to take place for a sixth round of talks between the US and the Iranians in Oman on Sunday. And then we had this morning, I mean, I was in the State Department on Thursday morning. It became clear that something was up, basically. The daily press briefing was pulled off the schedule. I mean, that has never happened, really, during the Trump administration, at least. And I think all the signals were that something may be imminent from the Israelis. And this felt like the Americans trying to position themselves to get ready for that. But I think what is incredibly significant is the statement that we have had from the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who has basically said Israel is on its own in this offensive action. The US is not involved. They've said it's unilateral action by the Israelis against Iran. The US, we are not involved in the strikes. And they say our top priority is protecting American forces and basically going on to warn the Iranians against thinking about targeting any US forces or bases in the region. What's really important about this statement is it doesn't mention the defense of Israel in terms of it being any sort of joint action by the US at all. That is extremely unusual. And I think we're now in sort of uncharted territory because President Trump had told Benjamin Netanyahu he didn't want him to do this. It's now clear from the Israelis they were basically planning from Monday to do this now. There was a phone call between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump on Monday. It was described as extremely tense. It was clear that President Trump had tried to stop the Israelis from attacking the Iranians and give the diplomatic path more time, and that hasn't happened. So it feels like Prime Minister Netanyahu has gone it alone, potentially against the direct wishes of the President of the United States. That is extremely significant. And now, remember last year when there was a build-up and an escalation, direct escalation and firing between the Israelis and the Iranians on at least two occasions. The Americans basically organised a defensive coalition to help Israel defend itself against the missile strikes from the Iranians. There doesn't feel like any kind of that sense of organisation this time around. You know, Israelis were woken up by air raid sirens, and they've said this was to wake people up, not because of incoming Iranian missiles, but that, I think, is almost inevitable now, an Iranian counterattack. And so you're going to have to see the US probably try and scramble to help the Israelis without that sort of sense of organisation last time. But beyond that, even that isn't abundantly clear. And remember, there's been an extremely fractious relationship between Mr. Netanyahu and President Trump. Mr. Netanyahu has in the past made a point of trying to show to Washington that he is prepared to act unilaterally in the way that he thinks is in Israel's self-interest. Remember, he tried to derail the first nuclear deal under President Obama by basically going behind President Obama's back, making direct appeals to Republicans in Washington. The White House was enraged by his behaviour that time around. So you've got a very fractious relationship between these two men at an absolutely critical moment now, with the chance of a far, far greater escalation in the Middle East now very possible and potentially likely. And we're seeing very wide-scale attacks, at least 6 locations across Iran. A nuclear enrichment facility, so says Benjamin Netanyahu, at Natanz has been attacked. Civilian casualties. Iranian state media are talking about civilians, including women and children, they say, killed in one strike in Iran. It's clear that assassinations are involved of, nuclear officials. So this is a big attack, very widespread, amid a sort of fractious relationship between Israel and its absolutely key ally, the United States, when it comes to its defensive posture in the Middle East.